In celebration of Joan Chen returning to lesbian cinema with Montreal My Beautiful, today I thought we'd talk about a curious chapter in her lesbian film history, Wildside, an erotic thriller from the 90s where Joan Chen plays one half of a lesbian romance alongside Anne Heche. This film is not only an interesting case study for its contributions to lesbian science and connections to 90s lesbian pop culture and history, but it also has a disturbing amount of tragedy, dark secrets and controversy attached to it. And in this video, we're going to be shining a light upon its shadowy lore. For those of you who are not familiar with Wildside, it's about a bank executive, Alex Lee, who becomes a high-class cool girl for notorious money launderer Bruno Buckingham in order to make ends meet. But after she's framed by an undercover agent working as Bruno's chauffeur, Alex is forced to help the FBI bring Bruno to justice. Backed into a corner with no way out, Alex decides to make a run for it with Bruno's wife, Virginia, with whom she's fallen in love. Yeah, I too would risk it all for Joan Chen. Relatable. Okay, let's get into it. The director of Wildside, Donald Cammell, came from an incredibly wealthy background. He was a descendant of Charles Cammell, one of the founders of the Cammell-led shipbuilding empire, and he initially trained as a painter, specifically a portrait artist, before turning his attention to screenwriting. Throughout his career in film, Cammell worked on various projects where he acted, wrote screenplays, directed music videos, and produced 4 feature films: Performance, Demon Seed, White of the Eye, and Wildside. In 1974, when Cammell was 40 years old, he set his sights on a 14-year-old girl, Chena Kong, the daughter of actress Anita Liu, who was also a longtime girlfriend of Marlon Brando. And Cammell used to pick Kong up from school, taking her out on trips to the desert, sometimes even forging notes to keep her away for the whole day. And Cammell and Kong began an affair and got married 4 years later in 1978, when Kong turned 18. As a side note here, in the Donald Cammell documentary, The Ultimate Performance, Cammell is described as having a #1 obsession with young girls and being involved in dodgy sexual situations, both of which suggest that his pursuit of a minor was not a one-time incident. Cammell and Kong frequently wrote together, with their works including unproduced projects such as Fantan and 33, and their greenlit feature films, including The White of the Eye in 1987 and Wildside in 1995. And after Cammell's death, their short film The Argument was released in 1999. The relationship between Cammell and Kong put a strain on and nearly ended Cammell's friendship with Marlon Brando, due to Brando's lengthy relationship with Kong's mother. Now, whether this was because Brando felt protective of Kong as a fatherly figure, or he was romantically jealous of either party, is up for interpretation. And for context, there have been reports, including from Christian Marquand, Brando's ex-boyfriend, that Brando was attracted to girls who were, to quote Marquand, far too young for him. Brando also starred in a film, Last Tango in Paris, that he purportedly was inspired to do as a result of Cammell's influence, where he and the director, Bernardo Bellucci, sprung an unscripted rape scene on a 19-year-old Maria Schneider without her prior knowledge or consent, leaving her traumatized and humiliated. So, considering Brando's reputation, his motives for opposing Cammell's relationship with Kong may not have been pure, but in any case, he did eventually reconcile with Cammell and collaborated with him on projects such as Fantan and Jericho, neither of which were successful, but it was on Jericho that Cammell was introduced to Ely Cohn, a producer of New Image, the film production and distribution company that would greenlight Wildside. The concept and script for Wildside was actually based on a short 20-page story written by Kong called The Grey Area, which was inspired by a BBC documentary she had seen about a corrupt cop. As mentioned, Wildside was produced by New Image, and in an interview with Chena Kong, she claimed that there was an element of creative guise in the pitch for Wildside, and the production company initially went for the script because they thought the cop character was the good guy and that the film was a generic cops and robbers story. Kong said, "We tended to do movies that way, in which we had couched in a cops and robbers story, something else." Yet, according to another source, Wildside was greenlit by New Image because they were apparently only looking to produce more highbrow art house material, which, alongside other key aspects of the script, such as the cop being a rapist and the lesbians riding off into the sunset together, somewhat contradicts Kong's claims that New Image wanted something or thought they were funding something conventional and stereotypical. But in any case, problems soon arose between Camel and New Image during the production of Wildside, with firstly New Image reducing the film's budget from $9 million to $3.5 million, and secondly not wanting a then unknown Anne Heche cast in the film. According to Kong, the production company wanted a woman with bigger breasts and thought Heche was too strident and strong-willed for the role. Thirdly, Kong claimed that the production company were overly focused on the sexual aspect of the film, disliked the homoerotic undertones between Bruno and Tony, and took issue with the slow pacing of the lesbian relationship, and to quote Kong, wanted to get straight to the lesbian sex. However, it's worth noting that other sources claim that New Image actually cut down on the lesbian sex scenes and allegedly disliked how explicit they were. Alongside all of this, Anne Heche, who died in 2022, wrote in her posthumous memoir that Camel had sexually harassed her on the set of Wildside. She claimed that Camel demanded she perform a sex act on Gina Kong to test her ability to perform a lesbian scene with Joan Chen. Heche refused and revealed that she only completed the film because the studio threatened to sue her if she didn't. In an interview with Joan Chen, Chen shared that Heche was unhappy on set, and when asked if she and Heche felt safe while shooting, Chen responded, "I think Anne wasn't feeling all that safe with the director, but we did our best to make each other feel safe, and Anne and I were very close because we wanted to protect one another and we wanted to make each other look the best we could." Tragically, Chen also shared that she lost a pregnancy during filming for Wildside. She said, "I went in pregnant and then during the shooting lost it. I was very much wrapped up in my own tragedy." So, between Heche's allegations and Chen's interview, there seems to be a disturbing picture being painted of the kind of environment and atmosphere the actresses were working within on set. Lastly, there were severe tensions and arguments between New Image and Camel during the post-production process of the film, with Camel wanting to preserve his original artistic vision and with New Image wanting to cut and change things in order to make the film more commercially appealing. After a lot of back and forth, protests and failed negotiations, Camel alongside his editor Frank Mazzola were removed from the editing room. According to Drew Hammond and David Camel, things got so heated that Camel had started carrying around a gun and had mentioned to David that he was thinking of shooting the producer, prompting David to have to step in and convince him that it wasn't a good idea. As a result of the turbulent editing process, New Image were dissatisfied with the final cut and abandoned plans for a cinema release, with Wildside going straight to video instead. Due to the feud and artistic differences, Camel removed his name from New Image's edit of his work, then, using his own money, hired a new editor, John Gammon, to work with him on a reconstruction of the film using the then new Avid system. And as a quick side note, the Avid system is a non-linear video editing system in anticipation of one day buying the rights and re-releasing Wildside in its intended form. However, Camel struggled to secure a deal for the film, and on the 24th of April 1996, he shot himself in the head. Purportedly, it took 45 minutes for him to die, and according to sources, including Gina Kong, during that period, Camel was able to converse with Kong and asked her if she could see the picture of Borges, which is a reference to his film performance, and if she would bring him a mirror in which he could watch himself die, which is a reference to their film White of the Eye. Now, this story has been contested in a biography about Donald Camel called Donald Camel, A Life on the Wildside by Sam and Rebecca Umland. So, how true this legend is and what anyone will do with the information either way, who can say? In 1997, New Image announced they were re-releasing a director's cut of Wildside and reinstating the lesbian scenes they allegedly once thought were too explicit. The reason for this re-release was not to do with Camel's death, but to do with Anne Heche and her relationship with Ellen DeGeneres, who at that time had publicly come out. And for context, within that time period, what she did was groundbreaking and controversial, which resulted in a media frenzy and even placed her on the front cover of Time magazine. And this was happening right as Heche's career was taking off. So it was the perfect storm, and once their relationship was exposed, they became two of the most talked about names in show business and were dubbed the world's first gay super couple. New Image seized the opportunity to capitalize on this by re-releasing Wildside and no longer treating the film like Quasimodo in cinema form. The fallout for Heish publicly dating Ellen was severe, with Heish claiming that it destroyed her career prospects, got her fired from a $10 million picture deal, and that she did not work in a studio picture for 10 years after she came out. The couple were together for about 3.5 years until 2000, when Heish left DeGeneres for Coleman Laffoon, a man who DeGeneres described as being like a brother to her, and this further negatively impacted Heish's career, with DeGeneres effectively blacklisting her from her talk show and therefore limiting her promotional opportunities for projects. In that very same year, Hamish McAlpine, the head of UK's Tartan Films, wanted to distribute Wildside in the UK, and as part of his plan, he was determined to release the film in a version as close to Camel's original artistic vision as possible. This led him to co-fund and produce a completely new version of the film, working with Frank Mazzola and Sheena Kong, and using the John Gammon's Avid cut, together with past conversations and notes from Camel as a guide. So the 2000 version of Wildside is as close to Camel's original intentions for the film as can be, and thus a rainbow appeared in the sky and everybody on Letterboxd stood up and clapped. Or some shit. I don't know. Moving on to some bonus personal thoughts on the film, for those who give a damn. And for context, I watched the 2000 version of the film, and to be succinct, in my humble opinion, there are only 2 reasons to watch Wildside. The first being the cast, who are all an excellent fit for their respective roles, and whose performances, comedic timing, and natural charisma do all of the heavy lifting in this film, and I mean all of it. The second being Joan Chen and Anne Heche's chemistry, which is both curious and intense. Their connection felt genuine and their scenes together truly absorbing. All I'm saying is that the Saliva Strings deserve their own Academy Award. And that's it. That's my Letterboxd review. I do wonder if some of Alex and Virginia's compelling connection is a reflection of Heish and Chen being each other's safe space on set, with it being a case of art imitating life, enhancing their scenes together. Alex and Virginia's love scenes are interesting. I mean, yes, for lesbian scientific reasons, but also in that they are explicit but not necessarily salacious, and they're not a totally unrealistic, blue as the warmest colour-esque spectacle either, which is surprising considering the type of film this is, and considering the consistent objectification of women and the male gaze that's present throughout most of the film too. I will say here that I do think there are visible moments of discomfort in Alex and Virginia's nude love scene, but that's understandable considering the environment Heish and Chen were working in. And even then, those moments are cushioned by their obvious chemistry and connection, which is ultimately what made the lesbian romance aspect of this film work. Alex and Virginia's first time together also very much emphasizes the notion of consent, which, even if it's a display of the film's performative feminism, which we'll get to, provides a stark contrast to and commentary about the rape scene between Tony and Alex. And alongside all of this, the lesbian couple also have a happily ever after. Now, don't get me wrong, the film is very much lesbianism made palatable for men and has obvious seedy and fetishistic influences to it. But that aside, it's worth noting that there are aspects of the lesbian representation in this film which are relatively progressive for the 90s. I think the worst aspect of this film has to be the writing, specifically the dialogue, which felt repetitive and contrived for the most part. The general narrative also felt largely uninspired, jerry-built, and constructed around the softcore elements. Like I said, the cast do a lot of heavy lifting and damage control, but even still, it's not enough to totally distract from just how glaringly awful the writing for this film is. It's just so bad. I do understand that this film is supposed to be outlandish and contains purposeful sexual, exploitative, softcore elements. That's the intended vibe. And it's also true that all of the sexual scenes in this film tell a story, but I felt the length in combination with the graphic nature of the rape scene between Tony and Alex was unnecessary, and the cinematography framed it as a voyeuristic experience that was uncomfortable to watch. And this is just one example of scenes in the film that clash with its feminist or progressive aspects. Here's the thing, in Camel's own words, Wildside is a feminist drama.
Wildside.
Tell me about it.
It's a feminist drama.
But Camel was a man who had a notorious reputation for mistreating women, for openly pursuing underage girls, and who overtly exploited and objectified women in his work. So the math is not mathing. And all of this alongside the previously mentioned gratuitousness and provocative cinematography in a scene containing sexual violence towards a woman in Wildside contradicts the film's supposed feminist aspects and exposes its themes of female empowerment as performative and ludicrous. Making a seedy softcore exploitative film about female empowerment is just, it's not giving, it's not reading a room. Art is subjective, yes, and on an entertainment level, Wildside is certainly not the worst piece of cinema I've ever had to sit through, but I find the articles and reviews blowing sentimental smoke up a posthumous Camel's ass, claiming Wildside to be some unsung feat of niche artistry that tragically never received its flowers due to New Image's interference. Absurd. I mean, it's lowbrow softcore, whichever way the film is cut. Hence why it collected dust for so many years, and even now is primarily remembered in relation to its controversy or cast, and specifically by those of us who have a crush on Joan Chen. Exhibit A. So yes, that's the lore behind the cursed lesbian film Wildside. Forget it, baby. Okay guys, thanks for watching. An extra special thank you to my members on Ko-Fi for feeding the life force of this channel like it's a lesbian Frankenstein's monster. If you have any thoughts or extra tea, cursed or not, about Wildside, let me know down in the comments section below. Don't forget to subscribe for instant disappointment, and I'll see you guys soon. Bye.